Until now, Django has given us a lot of features, the ability to represent models very efficiently with a migration method to be able to apply those changes to our databases. And now we'll be taking a look at this idea of authentication, that on many websites you want some method of authentication, the ability for users to be able to log in and log out, so Django would remember which user just logged in. And what we're going to do now is introduce an application that lets us interact with this authentication method, because Django has a lot of authentication features, and we'll be diving to that framework that will do the job. And so we don't need to write the logic, Django is going to do this for us. And so Django, as I said, has a lot of these features that will be doing for us everything. And so if we go ahead and head to our airline project, and I'm going to be creating an application that's going to be doing that authentication. So inside of my airline project, I have my flights application, and what I'd like to do now is create an application that's going to contain users that are inside of my application. So I'll be heading to my command prompt and creating a new app. So Python myninch.py start app, and let's call this app users. So we have flights, and now we'll be having users, another application called users, and it's inside of our project. And so as before, when I create any application, I'm going to go to project 1 airline, and then settings.py, and then add this new application into my installed apps. So users and comma, and of course I need to add this users application to my URLs. So the same way I added flights, I'm going to be adding users, the path of users. So users, and here we're going to be including users, the URLs of the users which are associated with my users application. And of course we need to add a comma. And so now we can save it. And now what I need to do is create those URLs. And so I'm going to go ahead to users URLs. I'm going to be creating a new file, called urls.py. And so inside of urls.py we need to add, let's just go ahead and copy same code from urls.py and just modify it. So we need to import views and path, and so inside of our urls.py, of course we have different paths, and so we have the main index, which is named index, and now we'll be creating a new path which is login, and this login path is going to take us to fuse.login, and we'll be creating that in a second. So login view, and let's give it a name of login, and of course we'll be adding a comma. And now let's add path logout, which is another path, comma, and that's going to take us to views.logout view. So we'll be also creating that in a moment, and let's give it a name of logout. So let's fix that, logout, and that's it. So let's go ahead and save that. As we've said, the first path is the main index route. That's just going to be displaying information about the currently signed in user, one for logging someone in, and one will be displaying something to display the user and his password, and one for the user to log out from this application. So now let's go ahead and actually write these functions. And so to write these functions, we need to go to views.py. And so we need first a function called index. And of course, let's have an argument called request. And inside of that function, we need. And so what do we want this function to do? It's going to display information about the currently signed in user, that I sign into this website and then I'm represented with this index page. Because if we think about it programmatically, we first need to think about what should happen if someone tries to access this page but they're not authenticated. How would we even know that, and what do we do in that situation? Well, let's say if not user dot is dot so this is request dot user, so it's if not request dot user is authenticated. So if this user is not authenticated, and add a double column. And so what I'm saying here is that the request object that gets passed as a part of the request for every user in Django automatically has a user attribute associated with it, and that user object has and is an authenticated attribute which tells us if the user is signed in or not. If he is not signed in, we're going to be returning a HTTP response. So HTTP response redirect, and what I'm going to be doing is getting the reverse of the login function, the path, that we've added in urls.py. And so here from django.https we need to import, of course, HTTP response redirect, and we need also to import from django.urls, we'll import, of course, reverse. So now that I've imported these, so this is HTTP, not S, and now we've imported these, and so if the user is not authenticated, we'll be redirected to the login path. And so now let's go ahead and create that login view. So this login view is going to be taking a request and is going to be returning for us a rendered template upon that request, of course, comma, let's call this template users/login.html, and let's go ahead and save that. And now let's create our template. So this is the templates folder, and inside of templates I'll be creating users, a file called users, and now we'll be creating layout.html, which is our main HTML page, and inside of that layout we'll be adding a block, the body block. Let's call this let's give it a title, users, and block which is called body. Now let's go ahead and create a new HTML file. Let's call it login.html, which is going to extend from that layout.html, and the block, we'll be inserting that block, and which is called body, and here we will be adding our content. And so inside of my block I'll be adding my HTML form, and so that form is going to be having an action and a method, and the action is going to go to that login view. And so this is the layout, the HTML, so in login.html I'm going to be giving it an action, which is a URL which is called login, which is the name of the path that we gave inside of urls.py. And now we close the parentheses, and we need to specify what method, which is, and obviously it's going to be post, because we'll be receiving information when we submit that form. So as I said, this is the form, this is an HTML form, and when generally doing that, we need to have post, so because we're receiving information, and we need to in a way get the username and the password. And so to do that, first things first, we need to add a CSRF in order to be in a safe place with that form. And now we need an input in order to add the username. So it's of course type text and name username, and we don't need that ID. We'll just add a placeholder which is called username in order to let the user know that he has to add the username. And so the name is just a name for us that we'll be using inside of views.py. It's not visible for the user. The visible thing is the placeholder. Now we'll be typing in the password, which is of type password. And so the difference between text and password is that the characters would be like bullet points, like circles. You won't see what the characters are. In the case of password, let's give it a name of password and a placeholder of password for the user to know that this is a password. And now, of course, we need to give an input, which is submit, in order to submit our form. And let's give it a value of login. So whenever we click on that button, which is called login, we'll be submitting that form. So now let's go ahead and open and run our server. So python manage.py, run server. And now, of course, we can see now that we have given an error. So we don't have a logout view attribute. So that's because we did not add it. So let's just add that logout view function. So logout view, which is going to be taking a request, and let's just put it pass for now. So pass will not do anything. It won't affect our function, but it won't give us an error because we did not write that function. So this is that logout view that we've called inside of our urls.py. Now, if we go ahead and refresh, you can see that the server is running normally. Now, let's go ahead and go to admin page and see if we can let's first of all, of course, log in with the initial username and password we've created in the beginning of the lecture, and let's just add some usernames before we go to add some users before we go to that login page that we created. So let's add a user. Let's say I add John, and let's give it a password. Let's give this username a password. So whatever you want, you can add inside of the password. And of course we need to save. And so you can see that now John was successfully added. We can give him a first name, a last name, and of course we can give him an email address. So walker@example.com. And so now we go ahead and save that. So let's go ahead now and log out and go to log in. So of course we need to go to first users and then /login, because login is inside of our application called users. And so now we can see that we have another error, which is template does not exist. And that's one major error that you might do, which is not specifying where that layout.html is. so it must be in users/layout.html. So now after refreshed, you can see that we have, since I'm not logged in, I am represented with that login, and I need to enter my username and password. If I were actually logged in, now that would give me log out instead of log in. However, let's say I write anything inside of username and password, you see that nothing happened because we haven't yet implemented that login method. So let's go ahead and add some code to our function in order to make it functional. So the first thing we need to do is this login view function could be called in two ways. One, via the getRequest method, meaning just show me that login view form, and one is via post, send it to that login view form. So via the form, we'll be calling this function. So if request dot method is, so we need the post, not the get. So if request dot method is post, I'm going to be doing a couple of code, and so that something is trying to get that username and that password. So I can get that username by getting from that request. So that form dot post, so that form that I've submitted, I'm going to be getting from it a variable that is called username, and that happens to be that input, which is username, which has the name username. And we'll be doing the same thing for password. So password equals to request dot post password. So now we have the username and the password that the user has submitted inside of the form. And now what I'd like to do is try to authenticate this user. And how do I go about doing that? Well, it turns out that there are a couple of functions that Django has given to me that I can import. So from Django dot contrib dot authenticate, I'm going to, so auth is for authentication, I'm going to be importing login function, and so we have the login and we have the logout function, and we have the authenticate function. So now these are three functions that we'll be ultimately using. One is to authenticate that user, so the name and password are correct, and so one is called login to log in the user, and one is logout to log out the user. And so after I've got that username and password, I'll be trying to authenticate that user to check if the username and password are correct. And to do so, I'm going to create a variable called user, which is going to be authenticate. That we'll be using that authenticate function in order to enter request first, and then the username, which is a parameter, which is going to be equal to username that we've got from that form, and that password too, which is also a parameter, is going to be equal to that password that we've got from that form as well. And so, as I said, it's going to be taking that username and password, and upon that request, and it's going to see if that user is actually a authenticated user. So, and if it is authenticated, it's going to give me that who this user actually is. And so if this user is not none, so if it's actually a user that has a name and a password, I'm going to go ahead and log in upon, of course, that request, and I'll be going to be logging in that user. And now let's go ahead and return to the main page, which is the index page. So return HTTP response redirect, reverse, and is going to go to the index, which is the name of my path. So, and we've already imported them, so we don't need to import them again. So, else if that user is actually none, I'd like to return to that login view. So I'm going just to copy that. However, this time I'd like to carry on a parameter. So this parameter is a message which is going to say that your credentials are wrong. So incorrect credentials. And of course we need to add them between strings. So now we'll be saving it. And so now inside of our login.html, I can say something like if there is actually a message. So if message, I'm going to be printing that message. So if message, I'll be just showing that message. Now let's go ahead and see if that actually works. So now you can see that because I've refreshed, you can see that I've added credentials and it's incorrect. So it actually worked. However, you've seen that incorrect because I refreshed. So now if I redo that, I enter anything, I can see that I'm given with incorrect credentials, as in this user is not actually a user inside of my application. So now let's go ahead and continue my program. So we actually said if the user is not authenticated, we'll be going to that login, so in order to authenticate. However, if the user is actually authenticated, I'll be returning to render template, which is render upon the request, and it's going to take us to let's fix that indentation, and let's say user/user.html. So if that user is actually authenticated, we'll go and see some information about that user. So let's create user.html. It's going to be, of course, extending layout dot users/layers.html, and inside of that block called body, we'll be adding some information about that user. So I can say something like h1, and inside of my heading 1, first let's say welcome user. So inside of double curly brackets, I'm going to be taking from that request that user, and we can of course access, let's say, his first name by typing in a parameter which is first name. Now after we do that, after we welcome that user, we can add some information inside a smaller heading, let's say h2, and username. Just enter his username by adding request.user.the parameter which is called username. And let's say now we also want to display his email, so email, which is request.user.email. And so now that we've done, let's go ahead and save and go to views.py. This is our index, which is let's go ahead now and refresh. And now let's try to enter a valid credential, and of course with the valid password, and you can see now that we are returned with welcome John. John is the first name, and that's his username, and that's his email, which we've added to our admin interface. And that's because John is logged in, and when we request that information of the user, we're requesting from that logged in user, which is John. So we're accessing the properties of that user. Now one last thing we need to do is actually log out whenever we log in, and in order to do that, as we've said, we have that logout function that Django has created for us. And so we don't need to implement that logout method ourselves. We just need to add it to our function, so our logout function. So we'll be removing pass and just replace it with logout that user by requesting that user. So I'll be returning to login. So I'll just copy that, and I'll be passing as a message another message which is logged out. So you've recently logged out. And now inside of index.html, inside of our user.html, I'll be adding that link that will take us to that logout page. So I'll be adding a URL to that function, which is logout. So logout, and this is the name of the path which will take us to that function, that logout function, and let's just give it a name which is logout. So whenever we click on logout, you can see that it's here. So when we press on logout, you can see that we are logged out and we are returned to that login page. So now if we go ahead and re-sign in, you can see that now we are re-signed in. So we can log out, log in from that web page. So Django has given us a lot out of the box. It gave us the ability to represent these models in admin interface, to be able to manipulate them, a migration system that allows us to very quickly make changes to our models and apply them to our database, and also a built-in user authentication system, a system that allows us to very quickly enable users to be able to log in, log out from our web application as well. So all of these are features that are just here to help us make it so that we can very quickly take advantage of things like SQL and models and migrations to build dynamic, interesting web applications with data to back them up. So this is actually the end of the course. I hope you actually enjoyed this course with all these new methods in order to create a web application using Django. I hope you did not face any difficulty with any of the codes. If so, please add it into the discussion. I'll be more than glad to help you and guide you through the process. So this is Django and Python for web development. Thank you so much for reaching the end of the course.